That sounds fun. There's a lot of comments about Twitter and about emails and stuff like that. There's actually one of my favorite moments in your book is when you come back from Provincetown and you've spent 3 months off emails and Twitter, and you open up and you realize that you're not that important. And you say that your ego has been poked. Like, how much do you think of social media and that constant flitting attention sort of is about that feeling of self-importance that it gives you? It sort of hijacks your brain.
It's a really good question. Yeah, I remember coming back and thinking, I'm going to have so many emails. It's going to take me weeks to get through them. And because I had an auto reply that just said, I'm gone. Actually, it took me literally like an hour, I think, to go through emails. I was like, oh, I was like, well, the world didn't need me after all, right? No, you're absolutely right. And one of the things that spending too much time in this machinery does to us is, how would I put it? I thought a lot in Provincetown about, I actually never understood this phrase. So people will know the Canadian philosopher Marshall McLuhan famously said the medium is the message, right? And I don't think I ever really understood it. It's sort of a cliche that you hear everywhere. And you see Marshall McLuhan's in Annie Hall. He's the guy when, someone in the line is explaining Marshall McLuhan, and then Woody Allen pulls out Marshall McLuhan to say, you know nothing of my work. That's that guy, right? So I read Marshall McLuhan, and other people have written about him in the context of this debate, like Nicholas Carr. And McLuhan, what he meant was, when a new technology is invented, he was talking about television. We think of it as like a pipe, right? You put information in at one end, it comes out the other, but it's not. Every new technology is like putting on a new pair of goggles, and you start to see the world as shaped like this new technology. So when you're watching television, it doesn't matter if you're watching Wheel of Fortune or The Wire, you start to see the world as being like television. You start to see the world as being very fast. Everything's happening simultaneously. There's all sorts of ways in which television repatterns the way you see the world. So television has the medium of television has a message in it, right? That the world is fast, all sorts of things. And I started to think, what is the message buried in the medium? You mentioned Twitter, let's say that. Well, it doesn't matter whether you're Donald Trump, Bernie Sanders, or Bubba the Love Sponge. When you tweet, you're agreeing to a set of messages or expressing a set of messages. First message is, the world can sensibly be described in 280 character bursts. Secondly, what matters most is whether people immediately like and agree with your 280 character bursts, right? That's what that medium tells you. That's the message implicit in the medium. Or think about Instagram. What matters is how you look on the outside and whether people like how you look on the outside. There's all of these mediums have messages implicit in them. And I realized in Provincetown, when I was away from them, I don't agree with those messages. I think they're wrong. Actually, very few things can be described sensibly in 280 characters. I remember seeing a news channel recently where they said, tweet us your thoughts about the Israel-Palestine conflict. No, nothing useful can be said about Israel-Palestine in 280 characters. And actually, if you become particularly worried about whether people immediately agree with you, you're making a real mistake, because everyone who ever brought any progress to anything said something that most people disagreed with at first. And if you become afraid of saying the thing that people don't like, if you become afraid of saying the thing that people are angry about or resistant to, well, then we're blocking off the path to progress, right? Of course, you should try and persuade people. You should be open-hearted. You don't want to be a sort of, Millwall, no one likes us, we don't care kind of person. But equally, and then I thought about the medium in the message of the book. I read so many books in Provincetown. I've been reading far more books since, and obviously books have been such a formative part of my character earlier in my life. What's the message of the book? The printed book, right? Set aside what the actual words say. One of the messages is, slow down. Slow down. Think about one thing for 10 hours, right? Think about what it's like to be inside someone else's head. Think about a novel, right? It's about simulating another person's consciousness, imagining what it's like to be them. I've been reading a lot of Anita Bruckner lately, who's the most staggeringly incredible novel. I mean, anyone listening who hasn't read Anita Bruckner, I hadn't read her until about 2 years ago, just basically stop what you're doing and read Anita Bruckner and ignore me and my book. She's such a genius. And Anita Bruckner often writes about, this is not going to sell her very well, lonely old women, but trust me, read her. And And then you read her and then you look at a lonely old woman on the street and you think about her completely differently, right? I think the messages in the medium of the book feed the best parts of us. And the messages in the medium of, say, Twitter feed the worst parts of us. They incentivize all of us to be the worst version of ourselves. And I think about the times that I've been sort of winning on Twitter, when I've been getting loads of retweets. They've actually been the points in my life where I've been the least useful human being I can be. They've been when I've been most angry, when I've been most condemnatory, when I've been least merciful and kind, when I've been most glib and superficial. That's not who I want to be. I don't want my character to be repatterned to be like that by this system of rewards. I want to be like a person who's read lots of novels, not a person who's read lots of tweets. I know that sounds sanctimonious and a bit dickish, but I really mean it. And I would really urge for everyone else to do that as well. And I think about how many people I know and I like people from all across the political spectrum, all different kinds of people, where I think, God, if I'd met you on Twitter, we would absolutely fucking hate each other, right? And then you get to know them and they're lovely and wonderful. And complex, and it doesn't mean you don't disagree with people, of course, but so I think we need to plug into the best messages about people, not the worst, which isn't to say we don't disagree, but we can do it. There's ways we can do it that open up the possibility of persuasion and listening.
That's a beautiful answer. A final question from Jess, if you don't mind.
Hi, Jess.
Jess asks, lack of attention, lack of deep thinking seems to be a great political direction for authoritarianism to flourish. Don't worry, I will take care of you, says the dictator. Can you speak to this, asks Jess.
God, you're so right. Hannah Arendt talked about this a bit, about how lonely people are real fodder for, what's the technical term, parasocial relationships. So I spend a lot of my time in the US, usually half the year, though the plague has slightly thrown that off. And I never forget the person who comes into my mind. Let me think about this. This may not be a good answer to your question, but in the run up to the 2016 election, I spent some time with a group of friends of mine, amazing people, at the LA LGBT Center, and they have an outreach group led by one of the best people I know, a man named Dave Fleischer. And I went with them to Cleveland to try to get out the vote to stop Trump. I'm sure you would have guessed I was not in favor of Trump, but just in case you didn't, not in favor of Trump. And we went to this devastated part of West Cleveland that was like the poorest parts of Detroit. And we were on this long street in West Cleveland. What was the neighborhood called? It will come to me in a second. And a third of the houses had been demolished, a third were abandoned, and a third still had people living in them. And we knock on this door, and there was a woman. Sorry, I'll never forget her. I remember looking at her, and from looking at her, I guess she was 60. And she was talking about her life. As we got talking, I discovered she was the same age as me. And I was, 38 at the time? A really hard life, this woman. And she was not going to vote for Hillary Clinton. And she was really angry. And she said this thing that really knocked me back. She was talking about what the area used to be like, her parents, her grandparents. And she meant to say when I was young. What she actually said is when I was alive. And she didn't notice she'd done it. And me and Dave, we looked at each other, and I remember her door closing and thinking, that's how a lot of people feel. There are all sorts of social factors that feed authoritarianism, right? So one is, and these are deeply interconnected, of course, if you can't pay attention, you're more likely to be lonely, because friendships and relationships are about attention. I pay attention to you, you pay attention to me. We have reciprocal relationships. And I think about that woman, and I don't know that she had a bad sense of attention, but I would be amazed if she didn't. And you're absolutely right. Fragmented people who can't pay attention to each other, who can't follow complicated issues. And that's not because they're inherently like that, because they're being debased and degraded by the society. What's that phrase Professor Miller used? Perfect storm of cognitive degradation. They're absolutely more likely to be fodder for people. But I mean, even think about something as simple as, there's a really interesting study, a series of studies, the series of studies, but there's one particular study within it that looks at speed reading, right? So it turns out anyone can be taught how to speed read. You can teach anyone who's literate, you can teach them how to read much faster. But it comes with a really big cost, which is you will remember less of what you learn. That's kind of predictable. But also when you speed read, you become drawn to much more simplistic messages. And I think I'm remembering that study right. And, as we're going so fast, as we're paying attention to so little, of course, we become drawn to much more simplistic messages. And across the political spectrum, and I'm sure you can guess where I am on the political spectrum, but we're drawn to these ludicrously simplistic slogans that don't have where people don't have the attention to go, but what happens next? Think about build the wall. And then you go, okay, but what if they've got ladders? What happens then? Or abolish the police. Okay, we abolish the police. And the next day I come home and someone's, molesting my child. What do I do? Okay, because we don't have the attention to get to step 2 in the argument, we end up just screaming these absurd simplicities at each other. And I think we have a profoundly simplistic, and you don't want to be naive about this. There was never a golden age when we had, Socratic discourses about everything. But I think we are on a sharp, look, it's not a coincidence that countries as different as Britain and Brazil, right, as different as countries can be, are experiencing very similar forms of extreme polarization. There's lots of things going on, but part of it is related to attention. And you know who knows that? The authoritarians. The night Jair Bolsonaro the far-right leader was elected, I think it's fair to call him a fascist, was elected president of Brazil. What did his supporters chant at the election rally? Facebook, 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 because they knew why they'd won, right? So I think you're really onto something. This is something I explore a lot in the book, actually. And we need to think about, it's definitely, for me, I think it's certainly not a coincidence that our attention crisis and the big crisis of democracy that we're experiencing are happening at the same time. And I'll just say one last thing about that. You're too young to remember this, Lucas, but one of my earliest political memories is the ozone layer crisis. So for people who don't know, in the early 1980s, it was discovered that there was a chemical called CFCs in fridges and hairsprays, and we loved our hairsprays in the 80s, that was damaging the ozone layer. So the ozone layer is a layer of ozone that protects the Earth from the sun's rays. And it was discovered it was really damaging. This chemical was damaging the ozone layer and had actually created a hole in the ozone layer above the Arctic that could melt the Arctic. And I remember lying awake when I was like 6 or 7, like, oh my God, the ozone layer. And what happened? The science was explained to ordinary people. Those ordinary people were able to distinguish that science from lies, conspiracy theories, nonsense. Those ordinary people then organized to pressure their leaders, including leaders who were not congenial to regulation, Margaret Thatcher, George Bush Sr., to act, to ban these chemicals. So we banned CFCs. Now the ozone layer is healing. That crisis is solved. Now today, if the ozone layer crisis came along, I absolutely do not think that would happen. I mean, a lot of people will have watched Don't Look Up. I think we'd be in a Don't Look Up scenario, right? What would happen is some people would wear an ozone layer badge and it would build their identity around how much they love the ozone layer. Another group of right-wingers they'd spray hairsprays at the sky going, fuck you, liberals. You get people saying, how do we even know the ozone layer exists? Maybe the hole was made by George Soros. We would just become lost in a miasma of bullshit. And that's part of this, that's an illustration of this attention crisis that we're experiencing. It's why we've got to repair both individual and collective attention, and why so much of the book is about both of them. And I think you're absolutely right. When problem solving breaks down, you get more problems and you get authoritarians going, what was the line Trump said? I alone can fix it, right? Well, there you go. You can see how that's appealing to people whose attention has collapsed.
A beautiful answer. And just a final question from me is, and actually directly links to what you just said there, which is, there's a temptation with a book like this to end it on, just have some willpower, stop if you want to, just clean your room. But you don't. You end with, basically, we have to dismantle hypercapitalism and the new, neoliberal order.
That's not quite what I say, but yeah, no, I know what you mean.
No, but like you reach for systemic problems rather than just, looking inward. And potentially busting some of people's myths of their autonomy. Were you ever tempted to just sort of put a nice little, 2 or 3 12-point rules for life type thing? Or, I mean, you do have tips throughout, but fundamentally it's a political call to action as much as anything. Were you ever tempted to make it?
Yeah, that's a really smart question. When I came back from Provincetown, I wrote a draft of the book, a very early draft of part of the book that was like that. And partly because I hadn't interviewed all the experts yet, but would I put it? It's a really good question, because the honest answer is yes. And that draft didn't work because it was in bad faith. So it's not that I don't believe that there are lots of things individuals can do. I 100% do. I go through loads of individual solutions. But there's something about, and it's going to sound really odd, but I used to do a psychology show that comments on Big Brother contestants called Big Brother on the Couch many, many years ago, 15 years ago, whatever it was. And Davina McCall said something to me once, I'll never forget. She's a very wise person, Davina. People would always say on Big Brother, oh, they're faking it, they're not being real. And Davina said, you can't pretend to be something you're not on reality TV for more than 3 hours, right? Your real self comes through. And I think there's a similar thing with writing. Actually, if you write in bad faith, your writing won't be very good. And I wrote this draft that was all just personal advice and avoiding, because look, it can be really daunting, the collective solutions. And I avoided the collective solutions because I thought, God, this is going to be so fucking overwhelming for people. It's hard, right? Especially in a society. Think about the United States. They don't even give fucking insulin to diabetics. And here I am saying, let's take this big collective change to deal with attention problems. I understand it's daunting. I don't think we should think it's impossible. It's absolutely not. We're all the beneficiaries of struggles that seemed impossible once and now have come to pass. I'm gay. I didn't even hear the concept of gay marriage till I was 20 years old. But yeah, I did consider it. But the truth is, then you're only telling 30% of the story. And I think the reason this book is connecting with people is because people know at some level the person who's saying to you, you've got this terrible attention problem. All you need to do is use this meditation app for 5 minutes a day. You're going to be fine. At some level, we've used the fucking meditation apps. They're fine. They're good. And we still can't pay attention, right? I think people know. So I'm getting a bit sweary now. I think we know we need, people can see this is happening to everyone around them, or almost everyone. They can see this as a systemic problem and they are hungry for deeper answers. And I think the deeper answers are there, and I learned them, a lot of them. Of course, there's a lot more to learn, but I learned a lot of them from these amazing people. So yeah, I hope people will come back to me about what they think about those deeper, bigger questions, and we'll begin to fight. Because at the moment, I think we're in a race. On one side, you've got all these factors that are invading our attention, and they're only going to get more powerful if we don't act. Think about how much more addictive to a kid TikTok is than Facebook, right? The next iteration will be even more. Facebook's already patented a device that could read your emotions through your camera on your laptop and your phone. They don't use it yet, and would adjust accordingly, right? That stuff, Paul Graham, one of the leading investors in Silicon Valley, has said the world will become more addictive in the next 40 years than it was in the last 40 years. So on the other side of that race, they're going to keep invading our attention. We've got to form a movement. We've got to form a movement of ordinary people to say, you're not allowed to do this to us. We're not going to take it anymore. We're not going to let you do this to us and our kids. We're going to act to defend our attention, just like we needed a feminist movement for, and still obviously still desperately need a feminist movement for women to reclaim their rights to their bodies and their lives. We need an attention movement to reclaim our and our children's minds.
Johan, you've been so generous with your time. There are dozens of comments of thank you. This is amazing. This is brilliant. So thank you so much. I'm sorry we have to wrap up there. Sure. Everyone, please do check out Johan's book, Stolen Focus: Why You Can't Pay Attention, and check out our website for more exciting speeches.
Oh, and I meant to say, I meant to say as well, if anyone who wants to listen to the audio of any of the people I've been talking about, the interviews with them, it's all for free at stolenfocusbook.com. You can also find out where to get the audiobook. I meant to say, I sound like a right dick, you can also find out what Hillary Clinton, Stephen Fry, I can't say the rest of this, makes me sound too awful, but you can find out what lots of famous people have said about the book and loads of other fun information as well. So stolenfocusbook.com. Hooray. Thanks, everyone. And cheers, Nick. I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much. You asked really good questions. Hooray.
Well done to the audience. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a lovely night. Take care.
Bye.